Welcome! Thank you so much for joining me on the Socially Delightful podcast. I'm Jewel, human connection enthusiast and your host, and this show is all about delighting in yourself, delighting in socializing and in others, and creating truly supportive, delightful friendships and relationships, even in our modern world with our modern stress. In this podcast, we have fun creating a new culture of living in social delight. Now let's dive into how we're going to do that today.
Why are you giggling? Tell me.
Don't. It's like, oh, this is very important. I'm waiting for the numbers. Shh, be quiet, self.
I love it. I love it. So, everybody, welcome to the Socially Delightful podcast. My guest, Laura, today was giggling because the recording software that we use is so dramatic. It's like 5, 4, 3. It's very, whoa, we're doing this. I'm so excited, y'all, to have Laura Phoenix, pronouns she, they, on the podcast today. Y'all, I met our lovely guest Laura today on this service that we both use called FocusMate, which I have been a user of FocusMate for years. I love it. So what FocusMate is it pairs you with random people in the world. I have mine set to only women, but it pairs you with people in the world and you focus for like 25 minutes, 50 minutes, or 75-minute sessions. And you start the session saying like what you're working on, and then most people like mute, and then at the end you like go, oh, here's where I'm at with my progress. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you. I met Laura on FocusMate, and she was telling me about what she did in the world, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like, I definitely want to ask her more about that. And then she goes, yeah, like I'm, messaging people to be on their podcast. And I was like, stop it. Stop it right now. I'm going to send you my link. I want you on my podcast.
It was so amazing.
So, y'all, this is our second time meeting, and this is just such a great example of like connection can happen in an instant, in a spark. I just really appreciated Laura's energy and what she does. So, about lovely Laura Phoenix here, she is passionate about helping people tap into the body's role in how we feel and how we heal. She's the founder of Warrior Pose and Yoga Healing. Laura has guided thousands of people to discover new ways of feeling better, safer, and able to grow alongside the trauma that they carry. As a somatic experience practitioner, certified yoga teacher, and healing professional for more than 10 years, she empathetically welcomes humans of all shapes, races, and genders into her practice. In addition to her professional experience, Laura is also an abuse and trauma survivor who trusts in healing yoga and body work to guide herself forward. Personally, she comes to this work as a cis, queer, white, able-bodied, neurodivergent woman honored to hold space and to learn from the diverse perspectives of the folks she serves. Rooted in Durham, North Carolina, Laura finds caring for others in a difficult world to be powerful and beautiful. Beyond healing work, she can also be found running in the morning, planting in her garden, laughing with the people who fill her days with love, and shared meals, game nights, and cozy chats by the fire. Laura, see what I mean, y'all? Like, people, because, okay, this is also a secret hidden agenda of mine, because I'm so excited to talk about this work. Yeah, especially because relational trauma and self-esteem are often really impacted by trauma. So I'm excited to talk about that with you, because that is not work that I do, right? I'm trauma informed, but I'm not trauma responsive. So just to help support people in that way, I also have a secret agenda of you being here, because there's this notion out in the world. I don't know the word, but there's this belief out in the world that like it's hard to find your people. And when I met you and I heard about what you did and I got to experience your energy again, have that spark with you, and like I was like, oh, okay, this is somebody that I really want to connect with. It can really be that easy. And reading your bio was just such a, like, out loud to everybody, was such a great reminder of how right I was on that and how aligned it was. It really, y'all, can be easy to find your people. But anyway, Laura, I'm gonna stop jibber jabbing at you.
I mean,
Thank
I feel
you.
like the same way. This is, I think, a really cool thing that you're meaning to draw people to. That I think when we have, often for very good reason, when we have a lot of defenses up, it does feel hard to find your people because
Yeah.
you're scared of people. Um,
Yeah.
and when we're able to work with those and transform them, then it can be really easy to spot a connection.
Yeah. It's so right. And it's not that it's hard within itself to find people. It's not that your people aren't out there or that connection can't happen in an instant. Like, yeah, friendships take time, but there are so many wonderful people out there. And like Laura said, what makes it hard are like our blocks that get in the way. Like you said, being scared of people. So, so well said.
Thanks.
I also know you have such a beautiful story with being supported in your community and your connection as of recently. Would you mind telling us about that?
Sure, yeah. So ironically, as a person who has been surrounded by queer people for like the better part of my like adult life, it took me approximately this long to understand myself as queer. Um, and when I just had my first girlfriend last year, um, that was a really joyful, transformative experience, even as that relationship didn't last.
Mm.
But coming out for me, and I have to admit there's also some grief coupled in there about how much I miss not coming out earlier in life. But coming out when I did, was met with so much support and openness and celebration. It was more or less a non-issue. Not only was it a non-issue, but so many of the friends and colleagues and the people who have seen me were like, "Oh yeah, we knew." Like, "Well, welcome. We were just waiting for you." Blah. Which
Oh,
chokes me up a lot to think about, and is also really reparative because that is not my experience of my early life. It's not being celebrated like this. So yeah, it's been a big transformation to be like welcomed to the club with open arms and to be able to connect with myself in a different way. Like I've never been in a relationship where I felt so connected to myself as I did in this one.
yeah. Would you mind me asking a little bit more about that?
Sure.
About what that looked like for you?
Yeah. I think, speaking of how fear shows up in relationships, sometimes it shows up and I think we don't know about it. Because in some ways it's designed as a defensive response. It's not designed so that we can sit there and be in it. It's to protect us from something that our nervous system has registered not safe. And when our early relationships weren't safe, that's an imprint that lasts. And so it certainly was in me that compulsory heteronormativity is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was told from a very young age and in so many certain and uncertain ways that I was meant to be coupled with a man. Um, and that was what I could expect from a relationship. That was what I could expect, sexually. That was who I was. And I think as a person who doesn't experience like profound immediate attraction like some people do, it was kind of easy to hide that. And so in relationships with men, I would often find myself more protected than I realized I was. There was just, it's hard to articulate exactly what it was, but it's that felt sense of not really seen, not really safe, not really understood, and certainly not in an equal power dynamic, which is a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in this first relationship with a woman, one thing that was really powerful for me was literally just feeling how much power I had in the relationship, feeling that I could be present in ways that I could never have been with a man. Um, and obviously things weren't perfect. We broke up, but feeling like I could show up as myself, noticing that I felt more empowered to say that this is what I need or what I want in a situation, and that made it so much more joyful in a really deep way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I Y'all, I have a question on my podcast forum that's like, tell Jules going to ask you in the beginning about a story of connection, and it's like, one story is better than the other, but I don't think we've ever jumped into a podcast with so much heart and vulnerability and rawness from the beginning. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and I'm also
Thank you.
so excited for you.
Well, thanks for that good question. I have to admit it was a hard one because I looked at it and my first impulse was like, how can I make myself look good?
Yeah,
like,
as
okay,
humans are. Yeah, as humans are, right? Makes sense. uh but it's truly so beautiful, and it's also just the core of what this podcast is about. And it's about being authentically yourself, and then getting in spaces which again are easier to find than we might think, but getting in spaces where we can feel seen, and where we can feel safe, and where we can become even more of ourselves. That is one thing that I was really surprised by when I started being with my partner. Uh, so in the past, not that my ex partners were not amazing people all on their own, right? But I I thought too, I had done all of this work on my authenticity and my confidence and my connection, right? Like, everybody on the podcast probably knows my story. But I went from carrying around this, it almost felt like a block in my body, this heavy block in my body and I took everything personally, and was constantly over analyzing, and I, using like evidence-based practices, went from really just like dropping that block and feeling so good about myself. And I was so surprised when, because I didn't think it could get any better, to be honest with you. I was like, yeah, this is great, like I'm doing great, like this is awesome, I feel awesome. And being with my partner has only brought me closer, and has only brought out even more of who I already am, has only celebrated me more. I didn't realize it was possible for me to get funnier, weirder, and to tap into this whole other level of authenticity. Like, that is the power of these relationships, of sharing who we are and being in places where we are seen and celebrated. So
Yeah. Isn't that a great feedback loop? Like I love that for you, that you show up and you present yourself and then you're met with like warmth and belonging. And then of course you want to show up more. Like that's what we all deserve. That's so beautiful. I'm excited for you.
thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's the best feedback loop. Which, speaking of that, I know that this is something that you help people with, really, with like trauma and recovery, and that's something I really want to talk about, your work. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into yoga and into like somatic experiencing? Because wow, what a beautiful thing.
I mean, like speaking of positive feedback loops,
Yeah.
um, I got into yoga like I don't know, like 2006, 7, 8, something like that. I'm super bad with remembering dates and times and years, but I I actually went to my first yoga class and was like, what is going on? They're chanting in Sanskrit. I like jacked up my neck. I didn't like it. All this to say, I didn't like my first yoga class. But then a friend wanted me to go to her teacher, and that was kind of fun. And then for whatever reason, I ended up with the teacher I practiced with in New York for years, and ended up being a friend, ended up being just was really lovely. And I think a big reason that I was drawn to that practice, there were a couple. I'm going to admit that part of it was a little bit like, oh, a hard thing that I can't yet do that I feel the possibility of being able to learn. That was part of it, right? Ooh. But the other part, the part that I think was really important for my healing and that in some ways was a catalyst for where I am today, was that I felt really safe with that person. He was very kind and compassionate, and there were some ways about how he held that space that let me get in touch with pieces of myself that I don't think I was in touch with at that time. I have not always been on the kind of healing trajectory that's happened over the last, time since then. But anyway, so that was part of what got me interested and got me started. And when I decided that I wanted teaching yoga to be a substantial part of my professional life, I was pretty immediately taken with some of the work and the studies that established it as. And I'll be clear about this in a second. I may stutter over myself, but not all yoga per se is an evidence-based treatment for complex trauma, but there's a way of teaching it that is. And that was really fascinating to me. So I immediately started figuring out about how that worked. And so that evolved as not only part of my professional life, but my entire professional life for a time, where holding trauma-informed yoga spaces and trauma-informed healing spaces in groups was the crux of what I did. And then several years ago, a friend who knew what I was doing, who I talked to a lot, who's a social worker, lovely social worker colleague friend, said, "Hey, but what about somatic experiencing training?" And that was a really big deal for me, because I think part of what I was doing as I was figuring out career was seeing more folks one-on-one. And in some ways that trauma-informed yoga approach can work one-on-one. I do it and have done it one-on-one, but it's a lot more about me presenting options and the person I am guiding deciding whether to do or not do the thing that I say than it is about a feedback loop and the relationship. And I think something that struck me right away about SE was that being in relationship is at the heart of what's so deeply healing, particularly for relational trauma. We are hurt in relationship, and that's where we heal.
Yeah.
And so being able to really directly connect with how I've been holding space for people and what's been transforming in them has been beautiful teaching for me, as it's also been healing for them. And so I love what I do.
Oh. And so if somebody has never heard of somatic experiencing before,
yeah,
go ahead.
I actually wrote a piece on my blog about how it's a little bit like somebody explaining therapy to someone who's never been to therapy.
Yeah.
So in some ways, and for some clients, it is a bit like talk therapy. As humans, that's how we communicate. So I am talking to my clients. I'm finding out about how they are in the world and what they love and when they feel most themselves. That's a question I usually ask someone I don't know yet. So it's harder for some people to answer than others. As a body worker, I do quite a bit of my work for folks who want it on the table. Then by the table, I mean the massage table, particularly for those of us who have really early developmental and pre-verbal trauma. We learn our first connections through touch. When we're infants, our caregivers ostensibly do talk to us, but we learn that we're safe and secure, or not so much, by being held. And so that can be a vehicle for profound transformation. I'm still talking to the person on the table. We're talking about what we might be doing. But the communication is essentially I'm here for you. I've got you. You are welcome exactly as you are, all of you.
So beautiful.
It's been really powerful. I noticed the first time I got this particular type of touch work that I do, that I experienced it as a client, I got up off the table and walked outside, and it was like I could see clearer. It wasn't just like, and I'll also be really clear, this isn't manipulative massage. Massage is beautiful. It's lovely to like work on the muscles that are mad and get them less mad. That's not what I do. So when I experienced this for the first time as a client, someone held their hands on parts of my body. And to be honest, as you can see, I'm a crier. I cried and cried. A lot of what was stuck in me was making its way out. And when I walked outside and it was like I could see the trees and the sunshine clearer, I could breathe easier. It's like I was a lot more fully present after that work. And I get the privilege of, not always, because some people can't let their defenses down that fast, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But with a lot of the folks I see, I can actually feel that quality. They like get up off the table and it's like, wow. And that's really cool. And it's often, because we are with this type of early trauma harmed over a long time, I'll admit that sometimes it takes a long time to unwind, but that unwinding is really cool and beautiful. And it's really very moving for me when somebody gets in touch with their felt sense in a way that they couldn't before. It's like, their defenses were down. They couldn't feel something that they were feeling. Yeah. And then it's safe enough to show up.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that and also giving us such a visual of that and like what that really looks like, because I think everyone can see how powerful that is. And one thing, it reminds me of, honestly, a lot of my clients, and some of y'all might be listening, so this may be you, I don't know. Right? Maybe talking about you here with love. But sometimes they will be in a space where they will be like, I should be able to handle this on my own. Yeah. I should be able to heal on my own. I should not need other people. And one thing that we work on, and everybody's a different case by case basis. Sometimes it's also, I help clients like see themselves, witness themselves, and be a support for themselves, which I help them all do that anyway. But with a lot of them, one thing that we work on is asking for the support that you want from your friends and receiving that support. And that's also really huge for women, because we're taught, right? Oversend yourself at the expense of other people, be a service to other people. And then I think, almost just to go on a little rant here, and then I think almost what happens is when we start learning, oh, I don't have to do that. I don't have to people pleaser or be a people pleaser, that we almost can become hard and like defensive and separate ourselves from other people. And so that is one thing that we work on a lot. So I could hear some of them, and some of you might be listening. This is directly us speaking to you. We are wired to heal, like Laura said, in relationships, in community. It is so fundamental. There was this study done, it was mentioned in Stephanie Harrison's New Happy book, where she talks about when we're feeling a negative emotion, we are wired to be seen in that, to have somebody mirror that, if you will, back to us, and for us to feel seen and safe.
Yeah.
So I was also, just to bring up another thing, more evidence for it, I was really surprised when I was going through my trauma-informed training that the number one way that we heal trauma is through connection. It was mind-blowing to me. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Laura? I can see you're like, yes.
I can actually relate to what you're saying. Sorry. I can actually relate to what you're saying, that you've heard clients say, I've heard clients say, I've said it myself. I can, because it's so much our conditioning as people under capitalism,
right,
as women, like lots of us, all of us, there's this like pull yourself up by your bootstraps stuff.
Yeah.
I'm restraining myself from cursing. I'm mad about it.
You can curse here. That's welcome.
Yes, that's bullshit.
All parts. Yeah.
The bullshit, right? That tells us that we're supposed to each be an island, and that it's our personal and moral failing if we can't like put all the pieces together and make it work and like be the little cog in the machine. So I think especially when our early experiences reinforce that and tell us that we are alone, um, it can appear empowering to be able to fix it ourselves. It's just that we can't because we're still in our old feedback loop. I can remember, oh crap, this may be part of what put me into some of my professional spaces was like, how many books can I read about relationships and trauma and healing? Like I've read a lot.
Yeah.
But it wasn't reading the books that did it for me. Like I can understand the theory and the concepts and the neuroscience, but that's not what heals my own nervous system. What heals my own nervous system is being with increasingly people who see and, just like you're saying, can mirror back my states, whether they're joyful or distressed. Because that's what gives us that felt sense of like, this is going to sound very meta, of being felt. Like we need that to feel secure in the world. We might be able to feel no feelings. We might be able to push off the distress if we just don't come into contact with what's under the surface. But we're not healing, we're surviving if that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you, because I feel the exact same way. I have a very similar story about reading all the books. I honestly, and I didn't put it together until the last couple of years, but I realized I picked up my first self-help book when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because I was trying to fix myself. I was
Yep.
trying to learn something in that book to fix myself.
Yep.
And there's a whole other like rant I could go on, everyone. But can you explain a bit more? Because like you said, that feeling of being felt and having that be reflected back to you in relationship, can you go into that a bit more on like why maybe that knowledge didn't translate, if you will? Like not that it didn't translate, because I think there's certain things, right, that frameworks and knowledge can help us with. Like one thing, for example, I'm always mindful of is Gottman's like bids. And for anybody
Yep.
that doesn't know what that means, is basically the Gottman Institute, which they've conducted like the longest studies on like marriage, relationships, love, and they're very accurate. They're very good. They're very well respected, and they have this concept of, oh, somebody will turn towards you and ask for like a bit of connection. And so it might be right asking about your day, or even like coming and like lightly touching your shoulder. And we have three choices. We can either turn towards them, turn away, or ignore them. And so turn towards them, if somebody lightly touches your shoulders, for maybe you to turn and like look at them. Turning away might be like, not right now. So anyway, that's something that I'm mindful of in all of my relationships at this point, literally even with my cat. So that concept has been really helpful for me. But I know what you mean when you're saying like, oh, it didn't heal my nervous system. And I know that there might be somebody listening that is like, oh, okay, I can kind of see that. So for you, what do you think it actually takes to heal your nervous system? Can you elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, I think it's going beyond knowing to feeling. The parts of our brain that know and that have the cognitive awareness and that articulate our thoughts and like, look, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm going to say this is not going to be this is going to be oversimplified and not 100% perfect.
Love it.
But those are the slower moving parts of our brain. They're the parts of our brain that work best when our nervous systems are well regulated, when we're relatively, I don't want to value judge calm as being like the desired way of being in the world. Like that's not really where it's at, but that are at least relatively unbothered. If we're relatively unbothered, that's when we do our best thinking. Those are the parts that know. So I can read about gotten in studies, or about, that I'd like my prefrontal cortex to be like well online all the time. I can know and understand that those are desired states of being. I can know and understand that some of the parts of me and clients that were damaged by early trauma are like sense of self, ability to feel safe and connected in relationship, like, etc. But that doesn't get to the heart of it, because where those things live is in the felt sense. Those are the parts of the brain that are very quick. The amygdala senses threat, the motor cortex responds. That's like, I wish I could remember I'm so bad at remembering numbers. So it's like seconds. I'm rusty on that. Somebody look it up.
Yeah.
Right. But these parts that are firing first, these parts that are immediately responsive, are the parts that need to feel something different in order for something different to be possible. So just like we're talking about earlier with healthier relationships being this positive feedback loop, often we are those healthier relationships. Like, that's why I schedule on a predictable interval with people, so that they know what to expect from me. That's why I'm going to show up to the best extent of my ability, like as transparent and as invitational as I can with folks, so they know that their agency is respected. And that's not knowing here, it's feeling. They can feel when they show up to me that I'm responsive, that I'm paying attention. They can feel that I care. And that's reparative.
Yeah.
Being able to feel that someone who is touching you notices when your heartbeat increases and checks in, like, how you doing? I'm not going to necessarily, for everyone, it's going to depend on the person, say like, hey, I noticed that your heart rate is increasing, because that's not the important thing. The important thing is that I'm attuned consistently.
Yeah.
I think those are the things that make the repair. Somebody shows up to a yoga class, right? Because dominant culture, you show up to a yoga class, and I will admit that I am a white person in a typical yoga-ish body, right? Like, I'm able-bodied. I'm like of normative weight. So in that way, like, yeah, there's a way I hold the container that's going to look like in a standard yoga studio class. But some of the things that are different are, instead of directing someone to do as I say, which replicates trauma, I'm going to invite them, if you like, consider doing this thing or something else. So those are some of the things that just make it, that by repetition over time, give that felt sense something new to be with.
Yeah.
I can show up to yoga class and cry in the corner if I need to. And if somebody shows video, like, I haven't necessarily gotten into the mechanics of this, but like, when I'm teaching, I'm on Zoom, usually, unless I'm with an institution. So I see the folks who are in my class, if they choose to show me their video, that too is a choice. If I see somebody stop practicing and cry, I'm not going to call it out, but I will damn sure make sure I say something like, do this thing or do whatever you need to take care of yourself. You're welcome exactly as you are. Because some part of us needs to hear that over and over and over.
Yeah. And, as an able-bodied, if you will, like you said, normal weight, petite, white woman, that is also accepting and being in a space that is that accepting of anything that comes up, that is truly like liberation from all of the stuff, whether it is trauma, but also just living in our society, in the structures and socialization that we have. It is a radical act to give yourself such an accepting space and be like, I don't need to be anything different than how I am. I accept myself as I am. I accept my humanness as I am. So thank you for explaining that. And I also, as you were talking, I'm just, again, y'all, my secret agenda is coming back up again, because there's been 1,000 things that Laura has said, where I'm like, yes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. Like, you're bringing that up. Yes. And it's just an example of, again, once again, like, it can be as easy as hopping on a focus mate session, which I don't know about you, but I do. I use it basically every day, and you talk to a bunch of people every day.
Yeah, if I'm not with a client and I've got to do the back end of the business, I'm on
Yeah.
Focus Meet.
Yeah, it's so helpful, y'all. Body doubling is so helpful.
Hmm.
Body doubling is co-working with somebody, but uh, it's just such a great reminder of somebody that you can have an amazing connection with and really align with is really just like right around the corner, right around the corner. So again, my secret agenda
Yeah,
there.
like how open can we be to new experiences?
Yeah, I love it. You also mentioned while you were explaining that, and I want to offer a different way of explaining, just so if anybody else is listening, like maybe this can help make it clear, because I know my clients actually, it's a module that I have in my program about the brain, and it doesn't like specifically call out like the nervous system, but about that how that works is because sometimes my clients, and again, I know I said this to you before we hopped on, but they are sensitive, empathetic, but socially perfectionistic and socially anxious. Most of the time, women, but also men, and of all ages. And so, this acceptance work is something that we are constantly doing in a bunch of different ways. We're doing it uh, in our words, we're doing it in the sessions, in the certain things that I do. And I don't know if any of my clients are listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, Jewel always does make sure that she's like, hey, can I offer? Or hey, what do you
Yeah.
think? Like, there's certain like consent based ways that I even approach, like, I like ask a question in a session, so we do this in a number of different ways. And so anyway, to bring up the module that I'm talking about, we have a module that talks about how your amygdala and your brainstem, and we make it super simple too. We're not getting super fancy with it, but that your amygdala will always be activated first, and that is right your survival part of your brain, and then it sends messages to your brainstem to your body, so that way you have an increased heart rate, so that way you have like a flash of anger, if you will, so that way you can defend yourself, run away, do whatever you need to. That part of the brain is always faster because that has helped us survive. Because if you weren't able to react that quickly, if you saw a tiger or if someone was coming to attack you, you were less likely to survive. And now we live in a modern world where we don't have to, most of the time for most people, in at least people that are listening to this podcast, I would assume. I don't know. So um, we don't have to live in a modern world where we're afraid of that. Uh, and then our prefrontal cortex, our conscious part of our brain, comes in third. It's always like slower. It's always third. And so what Laura is really describing is not just that we like get rid of that reaction, but in my opinion, you let me know what you think about this, but that we soften, if you will, we create more safety, so that way that part, that functioning isn't overreacting and over responding to situations. But it doesn't mean that we want that part to go away. I like to always tell clients, we're not trying to outrun your humanity. You're always going to have somewhat of an emotional reaction first, but we can soften it, we can quiet it, we can soothe it. And so that way, that part, the amygdala, brainstem, and then the prefrontal cortex catches up. But that way, those things, your nervous system, aren't getting, if you will, activated by everything. What are your thoughts on that, Laura?
I love that we're like ping ponging the language back and forth
Yeah.
because yeah, on the face of it, a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense. I think I would make a couple of changes, distinctions. Like
Yeah.
one thing that I like to tell people is you're not wrong. You have an extra sensitive threat assessment because you've been extra threatened. And
Mm.
although we aren't routinely running from tigers, like existing in a system where we are going into an election where, roughly half the electorate might be really interested in like legislating away our non-binary siblings' right to exist, for example,
Mm-hmm.
we are under threat. So I really want to validate that that people's stress responses are very valid and they're very protective, and we also don't want them driving the bus.
Yeah, thank you.
So like I want folks to have the skills to settle and soothe themselves. I work with folks on having the skills to settle and soothe themselves. And I think what's most important to me is that folks have their response and they also have a wider range of options than a real active nervous system tells us we have. I have a very active nervous system myself. I might see I don't know, like fill in the blank, like man wearing a MAGA hat that I don't so much like on site. Like there's something about that might feel threatening. Like, okay, so I'm having a response. Now, what do I do about it? Like that's what matters, is that I can have my response. I don't have to correct myself. I'm not wrong. But like, okay, now what do I need?
Yeah, that. Yes, exactly. Instead of making it wrong, instead of making it this shouldn't be here, because this happens a lot too with social anxiety. Just to put it in an example, because I love that you mentioned threat, but also with social anxiety, what happens for a lot of clients, and they'll be like, this is wrong, this shouldn't be here, this means something about me. If other people see this, I'm not going to be accepted. They can't tell, they're not supposed to know that I'm nervous, right? All of these thoughts that, I really struggled with, I know a lot of clients had. And to be like, okay, there's anxiety, there's these sensations, right? I think it's helpful for a lot of people to understand their brain, to understand maybe those things that have ramped up their anxiety. But in that moment, it's okay, what do I need right now? It's working with yourself, working with your body, and supporting yourself rather than trying to change or fix or do whatever else our society in so many ways tells us we need to do.
Well, and like here's my little hand modeling for the nervous system
Love
that I
it.
often do with people. Right, the activation response is like revving us up to do something. So if we're going into a crowded room, for example, it's like threat, 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 threat. If what we do then is shame ourselves, and no shade, that's been built in. Okay,
Yeah.
like that's not our fault. That's been taught to us. There's all this energy of this, and then there's all this energy of like, how can I keep myself from having the organic response that I am having? And so, like, especially working somatically, because I'll really work with folks on felt sense, on what literal sensation, what they're feeling in their bodies, what their bodies want to do. Like, how can we translate the language of your body? If in retelling me the story of how you walked into this very crowded room that was really felt threatening to you, that you needed to be in, can we notice what your body wants to do? Is it run away? If the person's embodied response is like their legs are twitching, I notice they're levitating out of their seat. So, okay, how can we honor your desire to run away? And we might work that a little bit so that they can feel it, so that that part of their nervous system gets its cookies, if you will.
Yeah. Such a
And
great
then what
example.
do they do?
And it doesn't mean that they run away.
Right. It means we give that part of the system what it needs. We might be doing something with the body. We might literally like act out running away in the legs. We might give the brain like uh, I've I've gone through this almost identical scenario with a number of clients over the years. So like, okay, we're in a room, we're non-binary, we don't really like all these ostensibly straight people around us. That could be a thing. It's been a thing. It's showed up in my office, right? It hasn't. A person has, but this is the thing. Like, okay, so what in that is like? Can you walk yourself around the room in your mind's eye? What in that room looks less crappy than that? And they notice that they're looking out the window a lot. So, okay, can we like envision ourselves running through the meadow, whatever it is? And then we re-engage. It's not like the point of it is like, okay, well, endless fantasy about getting away.
Right.
It's, can we honor that part of ourselves? Can we know it has a protective function? And then having honored that part of ourselves, having, like, usually what that does
Mm-hmm.
is settle down that activation enough that they can figure out, well, what do we do next?
Yeah.
What part of this room actually feels most okay to be in? Can we notice that there's someone in this room that seems less threatening than the rest, or whatever the language is? It depends
Mm-hmm.
what somebody's coming in with,
Right.
um, and work from there.
Yeah.
We're not trying to shut it down. We're working with it.
Yes, we're not trying to shut it down. And I'm so glad you brought up shame, because it is so much taught to us, even so much, y'all. I earlier, right, I mentioned I picked up my first self-help book at 12 to try to fix myself. And I have like a beef with self-help, and I'm somebody that technically works in the industry, right? But because I think it actually made my problems worse, because there's certain things that can be helpful for somebody if they are not shaming themselves all the time. However, I was shaming myself all of the time as a little 12-year-old. I uh, just to share, but I grew up with a lot of emotional abuse. And so I was already thinking that there was all these things wrong with me. And then I picked up self-help books, and this is what I'm trying to say, is I picked them up, and then there would be these subtle messages of, this is what you should be doing in order to be happy. Here's how you should be, how you should behave. And anytime I did not do those things, I was like, oh, I'm again failing. Again, something is wrong. It was I think it honestly perpetuated my pain of existing, to be honest with you. uh it also kept my nervous system dysregulated. It kept me, like you said, using shame to push it down, and it would just come up. It almost like got louder, right?
Yep.
It
Yep.
increased my social anxiety. It hurt my ability to connect with other people. And I'm not blaming the self-help book exactly for that. These problems were present before. But this my point in bringing this up is that there are so many ways where we are subtly shamed for us, and it even looks like a self-help book being like, this is what you should be doing. And there's some messages out there, right, that'll be like, this is what you should be doing, and if you don't do it, then don't expect to be happy. And then you're like, oh, okay. But if you are at a place where maybe your nervous system and your reactions are hyped up because of, like you said, your perceiving threat, then it's going to be hard to maybe do some of those things that the book suggests, for example. And so then it's just another thing to add on top of it. Hopefully I articulated that okay. But
I mean, yeah, that sounds like this whole sort of trauma vortex spiral. You're all, and I can, yep, you're telling my story too, for sure. Like, already super activated, already super uncomfortable, distressed, feeling shame. Like, read a book, How to Feel Better, right? It might not have been age 12, but like ish,
mm-hmm.
right? Oh, well, now not only do I feel badly, but I've failed to do the thing that's supposed to fix it. I'm extra bad. And I
Yeah.
might not have used that language, but that's kind of the feeling. And it's like a nasty spiral.
Yeah.
And I think people even, it's so foreign at certain points in our journeys. Like, still routinely have folks who I work with where there's like I'm distressed, but it's fine.
Mm.
I'm distressed, but like there's almost like a don't even bother to help me that comes out of some folks,
Mm.
which I think it's protective, and it's like can't even quite let that in yet. That being like, okay, you're the way that you are is all right. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, your feelings are welcome, and it's like, well, it's not though.
Yeah.
I can remember being like that.
Yeah. No, so true. I was coaching a client the other day, and we all have a desire to be seen, to be heard, to be witnessed, right? As demonstrated throughout this episode. And social anxiety, it says, no, don't look at me.
Yep.
Right? And it's like, pushing that need away. So I think too, also accepting, receiving. I mean, that's just like one example, but accepting and receiving is so hard, especially for people that have been marginalized. But this also just aligns so much with what we know about social anxiety. And I think social anxiety is widely misunderstood in our current like culture, because I was always like an extrovert and I always wanted to be around people, but it was so painful for me because I had social anxiety and just didn't realize it. I also was okay, like speaking in front of people or interacting with people. I also wanted to interact with people, so I never identified with having social anxiety. But one thing I wish people knew about social anxiety was that it's very shame based. Like social anxiety is, I feel shame about this part of me, about the things that are wrong with me. I don't want other people to see it. And so it's a hyper fear of judgment because I'm afraid of people seeing the things that I feel shame about. Right? And
Yeah.
so acceptance and everything, like that's just a blanket term for everything we're talking about today. But doing like this work that we're discussing is truly so helpful for I think all areas of life, especially for any of y'all listening that are social perfectionists and socially anxious, whether you're extroverted or introverted. This this is it. I want to ask you, Laura, if it's okay, because we started this episode today with your beautiful story, and if you do not want to answer this, that's so fine. We could just cut it out, no problem. But I am curious as to how your knowledge about this work, the work that you do, how it has helped you become even more of yourself and let yourself be seen in this way as you, in your words, came out.
Yeah. I think that healing is such a non-linear process. And there have been, certainly for me, fits and starts. And I think that especially somatic experiencing, especially like getting more in touch with how my own nervous system presents in a whole bunch of situations, what it's doing, how it's trying to work for me, some of which is at cross purposes to what I really want, right? Like you're naming social anxiety. I would say that I have struggled with that in situational ways. There was a time, I mean, this was like a decade ago, that I struggled with it pretty heavily. I was at the time incredibly dysregulated, incredibly low skill in terms of interpersonal relationships, self-regulation. And so I can remember times that I would literally cancel everything and like sort of cower in my room in fear. That was kind of a regular part of my life for a while. And I can remember that what I was so afraid of, and it was like I'm saying now in relatively unbothered language that I was so afraid of, but it was like full on real panic that people were going to see how distressed I was. That was what I was afraid of. And over time, as I've developed the capacity to sit with my own distress, as I've developed the understanding of where that distress comes from, and as I've been guided skillfully by professionals and by friends, because I've gotten a lot better at making more skilled friends, after working with people like us who are skilled at holding space, that's deepened my ability to be with people who are skilled just in life, right? Like, so I think it's another one of those reinforcement loops that the more I felt over time that I really was okay how I showed up, the more confident I've been in showing up as I am. Like as I said, and I've probably demonstrated pretty well, I have a very active nervous system. I'm highly sensitive. Like I clearly tear up very easily. And that used to be a source of shame for me because it was shamed when I was a child. And as an adult, there's a way that that still feels a little sticky. You know, it's not like that shame 100% dissolves away, but it's held more skillfully in a container of, I can be with this. I've been with this a lot of times. And other people can also be with this. And I've seen and felt that over and over again, so that I feel steadily more confident showing up. And I think that's a lot of what I'm lucky enough to see in my office too. Because in some ways that's a through line of healing, going from being shamed and possibly ignored and often mistreated, and being able to seek out relationships where we are instead celebrated and held, and in reciprocity and mutuality, where we learn to speak up for ourselves. We learn to move toward the people who treat us well, and we learn to truly be in community. Like, that is all of our birthright.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's having you on the podcast today. I was so into everything that you said, and so like, wow. And then whenever it came turn, if you will, for my brain to speak, my brain was so lit up, y'all. Like, the ADHD was so real today, because I just got so, I could feel it in my body, so
I know, right?
excited. So, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the Socially Delightful podcast. I'm so glad that I met you.
Me too.
For everybody listening, where can they find you and learn more about what you do? And yeah, go there first.
Sure. My website is www.warriorposeyoga.com. And there you can find a few freebies, including some short form yoga videos, as well as how to join ongoing live trauma informed yoga classes. I could right now take on a new somatic experiencing client if anyone's like, that sounds really cool, I want to do that. And I also, I work well remotely. That's something that pre-pandemic, I don't think I would have understood to be possible as a body worker. But I've done transformative work, like some of it's been done on me, and I've done transformative work with others over Zoom. So like, I work locally in Durham, North Carolina, and I also have clients across the US and a couple outside of it. So that's
fun.
a thing I can do.
So cool. And if anybody has any questions, are you comfortable with, because I also want to be really clear, we don't want anybody to go and like put their trauma directly into like Laura's inbox. But I imagine that maybe somebody listening, because one thing I'm really keen on is I'm trauma informed. I can help you with these skills. I can hold space for you in this way that is accepting. And I'm not trauma responsive. That is not work that I am not yet anyway certified to do.
I know you're working on it. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you so much. But I imagine that some people might have questions and things like that that maybe I'm not the best resource for. So I guess my question to you is like, how do you feel about people asking you questions? What do you feel? What do you invite, and maybe what do you not?
Yeah, I feel perfectly comfortable responding to email questions on my website. And specifically, if somebody's really, because I'll admit that email is like an okay medium for explaining a little bit of stuff, and it has its limitations. So if someone's really got questions, particularly about any of the work that we've described, there's a like yellowy gold book a free consult button at the top of my website. That's often a good way to have a dialogue with me about what's possible. And if I'm not the best fit for someone, I'll usually be pretty comfortable. If I can make a recommendation, I will. If I can't, then I'll just say that. So happy to have a conversation about somebody's trauma care needs that way.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, Laura, it was so nice to have you. I feel so aligned. We got to have you come back on the podcast to talk about some more things. And
Happy to. It's been so fun.
it's so fun. And everyone, thank you for joining us on the Socially Delightful podcast. I am so grateful that you came and hung out with us today.
Thanks so much, Jewel. I'm so delighted that I meet you.
Thanks for joining me on the Socially Delightful podcast. I'm Jewel, and I'm truly so grateful that you came and hung out with me today. If this podcast meant something to you, it would mean so much to me if you left me a review so that way I could keep making content that you love. And if you really want to make my whole day, share this podcast to your Instagram story and tag me at Connection with Jewel so I can shout you out. Or send me a message and let me know what resonated with you or what you want to hear next. And I'll see you at the next episode.